My story begins in 2005, when I first got introduced to Magic the Gathering by my older cousin. I was 10 years old, and I fell in love with the cards immediately. I loved how every card had a different function in the game, how each player had their own previously constructed pile of cards, and how there were synergies between each card you chose to put in your deck. To my 10-year-old self, that was so unbelievably mesmerizing, and with it, a whole new world of games opened up to me. The world of what I called games of cards. Every new card I read was like a mini Christmas, where I sat down with a friend of mine and just marveled in reading what each and every card did. I remember first seeing Zombie Cutthroat, and even if I didn't know of game design and flavor in the technical sense, I sure as hell knew that dude was up to no good, trying to ambush his victim with his shining blade when it came down to it. And it was awesome. I knew about elves from watching The Lord of the Rings. I loved the art from this 9th edition basic island. And I also bought a red and a blue deck to play with my friend during breaks at school. And that went on for a couple of years. I had 2 friends I played Magic with regularly. I fiended over my cousin's cards whenever my mom dropped me off at his house, reading hundreds of cards for hours and just flying away in my imagination when seeing mirrors, these little metallic people, and the huge towers with powerful effects such as gaining 10 life. But a few years passed. I changed schools. So now I had no one close to me that even knew of Magic, since Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the more popular game at the time. And I ended up just forgetting about Magic. Until one day, in which I was just browsing the interwebs and somehow ended up finding the top 8 list for the MTG Pro Tour. Now that piqued my interest. I opened up all of them, and most of the time, whenever I tried understanding what the deck was trying to do, I just failed miserably. They looked like a jumbled mess of cards that either drew cards, countered spells, or were just creatures or artifacts I didn't personally care for. There was no narrative to attach myself to. There weren't cards I cared for. But then, I found, under the 2008 section, Grape Shot Elves by Louis Scott Vargas from Pro Tour Berlin. I opened the deck up and saw cards I already loved in it. Look, Llanowar Elves, Nettle Sentinel. God, this card is overpowered. It's a 2/2 for only a single mana. So many elves, I thought. And boy oh boy, I was in for a treat. I eventually stumbled my way into this video on this website, YouTube, you might have heard of it, of the deck being played in the finals of the 2008 Pro Tour, featuring Maciej Zaralkaja and Louis Scott Vargas, who went on to be one of the most successful streamers and players of all time to this day. They were both playing elf decks, albeit with important distinctions playstyle-wise. But still, that made me immediately invested in what was happening. I told you I loved how MTG was a game about synergies between cards, like how Elvish Champion made my Llanowar Elves more powerful. But what I saw in that video, through 240 pixels of quality and matching pictures of the footage to the card art on the website, was mind-opening. Before watching the video, I, Magic expert at the time, questioned LSV's card choices heavily. You see, Maciej, whose deck list I also had access to thanks to the magical place I found, was playing a more attrition-based type of elves. He played a single copy of Elvish Champion to pump up his team, he had all 4 copies of Essence Warden in his main deck, and he planned on killing with a singleton Predator Dragon, which, I mean, just look at that art. That is some cool stuff. But LSV, he wasn't playing any of those cards. He just had a bunch of small elves and a single Regal Force, this frog dude which was a mere 5/5 and drew more cards, which, didn't look quite as cool. LSV also had this Grape Shot card in his main deck. 1 and a red for a sorcery that deals 1 damage to target creature or player. That's it. In my mind, the part saying Storm down there could have been flavor text for all I cared. It meant nothing to me. However, as I continued watching that video, and through many replays, pieced together what was happening, I fell in love with Magic again, and this time, it was through a much more powerful experience. The Summoner's Pact, which I just thought was a horrible card because it had the words "you lose the game" written on it, turned out to be a very important cog in the elven-made machinery LSV was piloting. The lack of heavy-punching creatures to pair out with his mana-producing elves turned out to be the correct choice. And the card I assumed could be only a mistake in WotC's deck lists, or a lapse in judgment from LSV, turned out to be the main win condition of the deck. With the powerful ability of Heritage Druid to tap 3 elves to generate 3 green mana, combined with the clause on Nettle Sentinel that untaps it every time you cast a green spell, and pairing this mana-generating engine with a Glimpse of Nature, meaning every small dork he played could draw him another dork to play, and so on and so forth, meant LSV could play through his entire deck as soon as turn 2 started. And once you drew your entire deck, you could just play your 1 of Grapeshot to bless the opponent's life total with a single card, copying itself for every spell he played before on his turn, thanks to the Storm clause I so naively ignored. It was a thing of beauty. Every card choice was spot on. In contrast to Mathieu's take on the Elves deck, with the Essence Wardens and the main deck plan of playing a massive Predator Dragon that would devour every elf he played in order to swoop in for a win, LSV's deck had Weird Harvest to set up his combo turns. He was also the only Elves pilot in the top 8 to play 4 copies of Elves of the Deep Shadow as a Llanowar Elves impersonator. And he was also the only one to play no copies of Wirewood Hivemaster, a 4-of in everyone else's piles. Now, don't get me wrong, as far as showing an interactive and complex match, the quarterfinals LSV played versus Kenny Ulberg piloting Tazarator, a deck much more suited to combat the Fast and Furious Elves deck, is a much better watch, where Lewis went from starting 0-2 into the reverse sweep, and a quite unfavorable matchup. But as a showcase of said Fast and Furious play patterns, the finals are where LSV proved to everyone that he truly was a master deck builder and pilot. But let's slow this down and set up a stage, shall we? This happened on turn 3 of the first game in the finals. LSV just untapped with 4 cards in play, 2 lands, a Nettle Sentinel, and a Heritage Druid. 3 cards less than Mathieu had on his side of the board. Mathieu even had an Essence Warden in play, meaning every creature LSV cast in order to power out a huge Grapeshot Storm would be countered by the life gained by Mathieu. LSV didn't have a Glimpse of Nature yet, the card that really tied the deck together. He had 4 copies of it in his deck, and if he shipped the turn back to Mathieu, he most likely wouldn't have ever seen a 4th turn. He had no say in it. He had to go for it. But without a glimpse, he had no option but to dig. He bursted out of the gates, casting a Summoner's Pact, searching for his second Nettle Sentinel. Now there truly was no way back. He was committed to winning this turn, because if he didn't, either Mathieu or the bargain he just struck would surely put an end to his game. The elves gathered together on a ritual led by the Heritage Druid, and started making more and more mana, and playing more and more small elves. But he still wasn't drawing cards in order to find his glimpses. He made a pact again, this time getting the Regal Force, the big frog dude, and plopped it down onto the battlefield with the amassed mana. A monument in and of itself, bestowing knowledge to Lewis's elves and drawing him 7 cards. And he still had no Glimpse of Nature. Another pact, drawn by the Regal Force, this time searching for a Visionary, was quickly cast, drawing a card as it hit the battlefield. He played another Visionary, drew another card, no glimpse in sight. Wirewood Symbiote activated its ability to return Visionary to his hand and recast it, drawing a card once more. And finally, he drew it.
There it is! Glimpse of Nature.
14 minus 4 for my life.
Now the glimpse is in effect.
Remember, he's still fighting through an Essence Ward here.
Oh, sure. I don't think one Essence Ward is good enough to stop him. Another Summoner's Pact.
When LSV went through that turn, with all the struggles and threat of missing on a glimpse and losing the first game in the finals, it felt like watching David Blaine pulling out something extraordinary in front of me. Like watching a chef making a fantastic pasta dish come together out of simple ingredients that end up being a wondrous delight to eat. Like watching a football team acting not as individuals on the field, but in unison, like a hive mind in action. That is the moment I realized this wasn't just a game of cards, it was a card game. It was the card game.
He's definitely an odds-on favorite this is going for all the decks. Got the great shot now.
Much like a culinary classic is more than a mashing of its ingredients, or how a football team is much more than a collection of its players, LSV had showed me how a deck could be much more than the sum of its separated cards, and how a game can be much, much more than something you just do as a kid.
Yep, the second set of scoring gets the job done, and Luis Scott Vargas takes a 1-0 lead. Smash!
There's Yo Montignon doing a silly little, a dirty dance, actually. A dirty dance.
Got the whole super team assembled, watching their boy, Luis Scott Vargas, trying to win the Pro Tour.